I'm looking at the Westwood admissions in 2002, May 31st to June 13th.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yes. And again, the primary diagnosis is conduct disorder. He's 17 at this time. Going to be 18 in September. And his behaviors in the hospital were such that they're reflective of the behavior patterns of adolescents who have this pervasive pattern of behavior and that are likely to go on to warrant a diagnosis of personality disorder. For example, he was found smoking in the bathroom. Now, in a hospital, that's a serious situation because of, among other things, fire is concerned. He also, a day or two later, eloped, ran off the hospital. The term, when you escape, the term is eloped, and he escaped from the hospital with someone else, came back, and basically the hospital sent him back to DYS the next day. That they didn't feel he needed continued treatment and felt that the behavior issues were not psychiatric issues as such.
And Dr. Kelly, lastly, just asking you about June through July of 2002 relative to the Bridgewater Hospital. Did you review those records?
I'm sure I did. I don't know if I... Yes.
And
June to July 2002.
what impact, if any, did those have on your evaluation of the defendant for criminal responsibility?
Again, the manipulative pattern of claiming psychiatric disorders in order to get out of situations that he wants to get out of. That was, I mean, he came into the hospital. In one of the earlier records, it says he only has hallucinations when he's at DYS facilities, but as soon as he gets to the psychiatric hospital, they go away. And so he was doing well in the hospital. The hospital staff contacted the psychiatrist at DYS, says he's ready to go. The DYS folks come, and all of a sudden he's having command hallucinations. There were some problems in terms of discharging the patient in that he told workers at DYS when they came to the hospital that he was still having command hallucinations, and on that basis they were reluctant to take him back. And then, so again, the pattern that goes through these admissions.
Lastly, Dr. Kelly, did you have the opportunity to review certain records from Bridgewater State Hospital from August of 2013 through August of 2014?
I did.
And did you have the opportunity to review the discharge summary?
Yes.
What was the diagnosis on the discharge summary for Mr. Alemany?
Antisocial personality disorder.
Was he during the time that he was there, was he ever diagnosed with a major mental disease or defect?
No.
And with respect to his stay at the Bridgewater State Hospital, was he administered certain medications?
He was basically refusing medication. They may have tried them along the way.
And I just want to ask you to take a look at this progress note, sir, and just read it to yourself, if you would. The highlighted portion.
Yes.
And does that reference a certain medication, sir?
Yes.
And what kind of medication is that?
It's Risperdal, which is in the class called antipsychotic.
And what was that particular medication administered for?
Supposedly to address his behavior, his impulsive, angry behavior.
And was there an entry in the note that the medication shouldn't be construed as to the patient being psychotic or having? What was your understanding as to why that medication was administered as opposed to why it was not?
It was for behavioral, to see if it would help with behavioral control, not because of a mental illness.
Dr. Kelly, the Bridgewater State Hospital record that you reviewed for the 1 year, August 2013 through August of 2014, how did those help you form the basis of your opinion relative to the defendant's
So
criminal responsibility?
it's consistent with my diagnosis. That was, having had the opportunity to have him kept there, that was their conclusion as well.
That's all I have. Thank you, Dr. Kelly.
Thank you, sir. Give me a second, Dr. Kelly. I'm going to try to find room for all this. Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
I'm good.
It's good to see you again. Dr. Kelly, were you in here yesterday when Dr. Abloh was testifying?
Yes.
So you heard the entirety of his testimony, correct?
I was, for yesterday, I was not here today.
Entirety of his testimony yesterday?
Yeah.
I know you were not here today, but you did hear him yesterday testify?
Yes.
You were a consultant to DYS for some period of time, sir?
Yes.
What period of time was that?
Back in the 80s,
Could you
90s.
speak up a little bit?
Back in 70s and 80s.
And what did you do for them?
I did like dangerousness assessments on the part of mental. I wasn't an employee. I was a consultant that was occasionally asked to come in and evaluate a teenager.
And you're not an employee of the DA's office either, of course, correct?
Correct.
You're an independent psychiatric expert. I think you indicated yesterday you were testifying across the hall for the defense.
Correct.
What percentage of the time that you testify in courts would you say you represent the state, and what percent do you think you represent the defense?
0 on each. I don't represent anyone.
Well, you represent the interests of them when you're here, don't you?
I like to think I represent the interests of psychiatry. Making
Okay,
it
well,
clear
in the
to
context of you representing today the interests of psychiatry, sir, are you getting, you're retained for what you do, correct?
Correct.
Have you been retained by the prosecution?
Yes.
Okay. And what percentage of the time would you say you are retained by the prosecution in criminal cases you do in Massachusetts, and what percent of the time do you think you're retained by the defense?
More often than not by the prosecution. I have kind of statistics, if you will, for the past several years.
Okay.
Last year, I was retained in 15 cases by the prosecution. 4 I testified at trial, 3 testified at a hearing, and 4 out of the 15 said, in my opinion,
Your Honor, Doctor, I'm just asking right now, what percentage of the prosecution, what percentage by defense?
probably 10% defendants, 90%.
And 90% prosecution. Okay, and has that been pretty consistent over your professional career over the last 40 years, or has that been consistent?
That's a ballpark. I'm looking at the different years, 10 to 20% for defendants. in terms of being retained, my opinion is not dependent on who, I like to think, who hired me.
I understand that, but I didn't ask you that question, but thank you anyway. With regard to, sir, the report that you executed in this case, it was written on April 29th, 2015?
I believe it was, yes.
And that related to, among other things, an interview you had with this particular defendant.
Yes.
Earlier on, correct?
Correct.
And is it your custom to just meet with a defendant in a criminal responsibility matter, particularly a murder case, just one time?
More often than not, it's just one extended time, yes.
Okay, when you say extended time, what do you consider extended?
Well, the classic 50-minute psychiatric hour is not what I would do. I would usually spend as much time as I felt I needed to cover the ground that needs to be covered in an interview. Occasionally, I've seen someone on more than one occasion if there's some particular need.
But usually you just see somebody once, either for 50 minutes or under certain circumstances for an extended period
Well,
of time.
when I'm doing my office treatments, that's the classic psychotherapy hour. It's a 50-minute hour. In forensic areas, civilly or criminally, as long as I need to, and if I need a second interview with the individual, I arrange to have it.
And in this particular case, you didn't feel it would be instructive or necessary for you to see him a second time, to see his demeanor, see the continuity of how he was looking and what he was saying to you?
Correct.
Okay. How many times did you see the person that you were representing yesterday?
Evaluating.
That you were representing the psychiatric, evaluating him for purposes of the defense?
About 2 hours as well.
Okay. And one occasion?
One occasion.
Now, sir, it'd be fair to say that it's fairly important in the assessment you make for criminal responsibility to have a pretty good working knowledge of what happened in the case, correct? The kind of predicate facts of what occurred.
Yes.
And what's alleged to have occurred, yes?
Yes.
Okay, and toward that end, you review certain documents, you make a certain investigation, yes?
Yes.
And in this particular case, sir, you reviewed materials and you discussed that, correct?
Yes.
Did you have any conversations with, other than Mr. Alemany, any member of his family?
No.
Didn't talk to his mother, his father, his brother, his
No.
alleged wife, girlfriend? No
No.
one. Did you try to? Did you try to reach
No.
them? Is it fair to say you didn't try to reach his sister either, any of his sisters or brothers?
That's correct.
And do you know their names?
I believe I do.
Okay. What would his
I
mother's
know
name be?
the brother that I think he's closest to, and he mentioned, is Jose or Joe. One of his sisters, I'm not specifically recalling the name, but she was a friend of his ex-girlfriend, and I believe he has 2 other brothers.
But you chose not to speak to any of them, sir, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and with regard to friends of his, do you know the name Eric Cataloni in the context of this investigation? In
I'm
this
not
case?
specifically recalling that name.
And how about Jonathan Lee? Do you know who he is? Could you tell me what their names are?
I didn't bring the police reports with me, so well, let me.
Well, sir, without referring to any notes, I'm asking you a question with all respect.
I don't have a present memory
of the
of
names
the
of any of
names
the
of,
3 victims in this case.
well, I know one of them,
And what would that be?
Amy Lord.
Okay. And do you know who the other 2 were?
I don't know the names of those. I know the circumstances.
Did you make any attempt to speak to either of the other two witnesses?
No.
Did you make any attempt to speak to any of the other two witnesses' friends or family?
No.
Did you make any attempt to speak to any of the precipient witnesses to either of their assaults?
No.
Did you make any opportunity, did you make any attempt to speak to a woman named Elizabeth Stevenson?
No.
Do you know who Elizabeth Stevenson is?
Yes.
And who would she be?
She's his ex-girlfriend and the mother of, they have a child together.
Right, and it'd be fair to say that she has a pretty good working knowledge of him over the 10 years they were together?
I would assume so, yes.
And you made no attempt to speak with her?
Correct.
Okay. And you indicated that you had looked at some videos, correct?
Yes.
And which videos did you look at, sir?
I looked at surveillance videos, like of ATMs. I gave them an overview. They're not particularly relevant to psychiatric issues, but I did have them and I did look at them. And those were the videos I think you referred to.
Would those have been surveillance videos of the defendant?
Yes.
Okay. You know where they were taken?
Various locations in the South Boston, Dorchester area.
Do you know what their significance or overall significance to the case would have been?
Pardon me? I don't.
Do you know what the significance of those video tapes were to this case?
Yes, that he was forcing her to withdraw money from various ATMs.
All right, so these weren't videos of him walking alone. These were videos of cars at an ATM, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And
Well, I think that some of the videos are of him. I mean, he's in the videos.
you're talking about the second individual in the car?
Pardon me?
You're talking about the second individual in the car?
You know, the one that's kind of coming to mind is, I think he's walking near one of those ATM areas, and he's got a particular hat or shirt on that identifies him. So,
So it's not a video of a car, it's not a video of him allegedly in a
well, I
car.
also saw a bunch of still photos, and again, I looked at them very quickly.
Okay.
They're not particularly relevant to me as a psychiatrist opining about his mental state.
Any other videos that you saw or didn't see?
That's what I'm recalling right now.
And in the report you wrote on April 29th, sir, have you reviewed that to testify here today?
Not recently, no.
When you did review it before, was there anything
Well,
in there?
I reviewed it before I sent it, for sure, and I probably have looked at it.
Whenever you reviewed it, did it ever, is there anything in there that you would change as being inaccurate?
I don't specifically recall seeing something, but
That's my question, sir. My
I don't
question is
recall anything that I would, that I, when I read it, thought was a substantial error.
I will ask you some questions, sir. In your report, you suggest that the defendant abducted Amy Lord at knife point, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Can I just ask you where you got that information from?
It was, well, it may have been in the police reports. He ends up stabbing her multiple times.
Yes, he
So
does.
I assumed that there was a knife in the process. I didn't mean to necessarily infer I had independent knowledge that at the very beginning he came up to her with a knife. I think my understanding is that he physically assaulted her, not that he did it at knife point. I mean, in terms of my understanding.
Sir, I'm asking you In your report, you wrote, he abducted her, he abducted Amy Lord at knife point. I'm just asking you where you got the information that this entire affair started at knife point.
I might be incorrect, but it would have been in the police reports or grand jury minutes or something of that sort.
And presumably someone would have witnessed that, correct? Amy Lord, unfortunately, was dead, so someone would have had to witness that or would have been on the video, correct?
That would be logical, yes.
Okay. Do you recall any video that was on? Do you recall which witness would have?
I don't.
Okay. And you also indicated that he had entered into her home basically to force her out. And same question, sir. Can you tell me who told you that or where you learned that information?
Again, it could be wrong, but I understood that she was exiting from her house in the early morning hours to go exercise, and he accosted her. And I don't know, I don't remember one way or the other whether they went back into the doorway or whether they
Or back
continued
into her
on.
apartment. I guess my question is, you made certain assumptions about what the predicate facts here are, correct?
I made certain assumptions about the general situation. I was not doing a detailed crime kind of thing like a policeman might do. I was trying to give a little general sense of my understanding of the background.
I understand that. I understand. But you would agree that it's important with regard to whether he was armed, whether he was using a knife, when he was. It's important to get some basic predicate facts accurate. Yes?
Well, not really, particularly for me as a psychiatrist. If he took her at knife point or beat her and dragged her, it's, from a psychiatric point of view, it's an abduction.
So if you
by
took her at knife
force.
point, if you took her at knife point, and there were a lot of people around, or you took her at gunpoint and raped her, when he took her out, it wouldn't matter because he was abducting her, and that's all that matters here.
Well, in terms of the psychiatric issues about mental disease, defect at the time, capacity to appreciate, capacity to conform, not really.
Sir, you're saying that if he had grabbed her, raped her in front of people, that would have been basically the same as taking her out unarmed and putting her into a car for purposes of what's going on in his head and the level of his mental disability and defects?
Well, clearly there's a difference committing rape in front of other people who are not also going to participate in the rape. I mean, civilians or witnesses that might witness, that would be different than abducting someone in the early morning hours, 5:30 or whatever it was.
Can we just agree that it makes the most sense to get these facts right?
It'd be nice if I was absolutely correct on every detail.
Or would it be nice if you didn't know the detail, if you didn't make that assumption and put it in there?
I don't understand that question.
Well, you're saying it would be nice if you got your facts right. Is that what I heard you say?
Very specific facts, right? Yes.
Well, could you not have simply said, if you were making an assumption and didn't really know how it happened, in terms of your methodology of going about these reports?
I think I have.
Couldn't you have simply said, I don't really know how we got her out of the house, but what we do know that at some point he was in a car with her, and at some point he took her to a reservation, and at some point he killed her.
I don't think that that's particularly critical in a psychiatric report.
You indicated that prior thereto he attempted to assault another woman, correct? Another young woman.
Correct.
You know that young woman's name?
I don't specifically recall it, no.
Do you know where the assault happened? Do you know where the assault happened, sir?
It was in South Boston.
Okay. Do you know where in South Boston?
I don't know the specific address.
Do you know the circumstances of the assault, the background context of it?
It was There were two assaults, and I might mix up the two of them. One, the first one, I think there was no knife involved, and there was a struggle, and he ran away. Okay?
Which was the first one, sir? Is that the Amy Lord one? Or is that the other one?
This was the one before the abduction of Amy Lord.
Okay, so now is the first one. So
Yes.
you are suggesting there was a knife involved in Amy Lord's on the abduction, but you've admitted that may not have been a knife, correct?
Correct.
And with regard to this, you don't know the woman's name, but this is the first abduction, correct?
I didn't hear. This is the person who...
Amy Lord is the second abduction.
Correct.
We now are, if you have this in your mind, sir, I'd like to actually just test your memory, and if you need to refresh your memory,
Okay.
and His Honor permits that. But the first assault, do you know what time that occurred?
I think it was in the 4 o'clock, 4 a.m.-ish.
And you indicated in your report that the woman successfully struggled with him, managed to get up and run away, correct?
Correct.
Is that your understanding of what happened? Without looking through your notes, sir, is that your understanding?
I'm looking at my own report.
And I would prefer, with respect,
Oh,
to
okay.
mention the court,
All right.
not to let you do that till I just test your memory.
Okay, okay. I think that's my understanding, yes.
So, again, could you restate what you believe happened in the first assault for me, please?
From memory, it was an hour or so prior to the abduction of Amy Lord. There was a struggle with a woman. Somehow he ran away, maybe because I don't know the details, but that did not result in an abduction. I believe she did report, but was not stabbed or seriously injured as the third woman was and as Amy Lord was.
So with this first assault that happened earlier today, your understanding is, I don't want to beat this horse too much, but your understanding was that the woman basically managed to struggle, fight him off, and then she was able to run away.
Or he was able to run.
So he ran away, and where did she go?
I'm not recalling.
Okay. If I suggested to you that what happened was that he approached this woman, he hit her, he knocked her down, he dragged her into a dark lot, and at some point he said to her something to the effect, "You're the wrong woman. I'm sorry. I'm a hitman. I was looking for a woman pushing a baby carriage wearing a white shirt with a man. I'm sorry." And he helped her get up, picked up her stuff, gave them to her, and she walked away. Would that refresh your memory?
I remember the part about the hitman kind of thing, and I did not recall how it ended. I knew that there was a physical assault, and there was the comment about a hitman and you're the wrong person, but that's the extent of my memory about
But
that.
in your conversation with me a moment ago, you didn't recall the hitman thing. Certainly you didn't say it to me. You didn't say
I
it to me,
didn't
did you?
until you reminded me of it, and then it's clicked. Okay, yeah, I remember that.
Would it be fair to say that kind of statement from someone might be important in terms of assessing his both state of mind and his level of mental illness at that point? Yes or no?
Not particularly.
It's something you wouldn't consider?
Oh, no, I would consider it, but it was not particularly important.
Okay. And there was a third assault at some point, was there not?
Yes,
And when I say a third, I'm talking within this 18-hour window.
correct,
Yes? Basically one day in his life.
correct.
And what can you tell me about the third assault, sir?
That was the assault in which the woman was stabbed, and he sustained a cut to his hand.
Okay.
And there was screaming, and then he ran off, I believe. It came to the attention of either roommates or people in the area.
And that presumably is in your report as well, correct?
I don't have my report committed to memory. I remember the general kind
So
of
what
sense.
you're remembering here as you're sitting here is that he attacked a woman. You remember where?
It was in South Boston.
Again, sir?
South Boston?
And then he ran off.
Correct.
And was there any particular reason he ran off?
I think she was screaming and caught the attention of others, or likely her screaming was heard.
And do you think, in terms of assessing his state of mind and his, ultimately his whatever psychiatric issues were going on, do you think it would be an important point that he didn't run off, he did not run away, even after the screaming and even after somebody yelled to him, "Asshole, I've called 911, cops are coming"? He looked at that person and very calmly walked away. Would that be significant to you at all?
Not particularly crucial from rendering a psychiatric opinion. It might be crucial for the juror, it might be crucial for police and criminologists, but for my task, does he have a mental disease or defect? Not really that important.
I'm just asking you, when you're building up your task, the building blocks of you ultimately coming to an opinion about what happened here, about what's going on in his head at this point. Is it not instructive to you that to get accurate facts of the natures of the assaults?
Well, I did read these police reports among 5,000 to 6,000 pages of material, and so I don't recall all of the details.
Of course, but wouldn't it be fair to say that these details that I'm mentioning to you right now, about the hitman conversation, about the fact that the police are allegedly coming and he just walks very calmly away in a kind of detached fashion, isn't that at least as important, if not more important, than many of the facts that you read repetitively contained in hospital reports from, as you pointed out, 10, 15 years ago? Isn't this much closer to the incident? Doesn't it give you, are you looking for insights into what's going on in his head now?
I can only answer as I have been. For the purpose of a psychiatric opinion, it is something to consider, but the small details of this are not very critical.
And you consider this a small detail, yes, that he simply walked
Yes.
away?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you know how congested the area was that for the third strikedown? For in the morning, first assault, do you know how congested the area was, whether there were
No.
people around or not?
No.
Okay. For the second assault, Amy Lord, do you know if people were around, how congested the area was?
I think I made an assumption that at 5:30, there's not a lot going on, but
But you didn't.
but I didn't.
You didn't look into it. You didn't do any independent investigation of that.
No.
Okay. And in the evening at midnight, when this third assault occurred, and there were actually several percipient witnesses, did you know how congested the area was? Did you care?
No.
Do you think it says something about his mindset and what's going on up here if he's committing these acts in an area where he's more likely to get caught than not?
He wasn't caught.
I'm just
I know-
asking you a
okay, well,
question, sir.
The question was about likely to be caught.
More likely to be caught than not.
Again, it would be bad judgment to commit a crime in an area where you're more likely to be caught than not. Beyond that, I don't think I can answer.
And would it be bad judgment to commit a crime or 3 crimes within a very short distance of your house, your own place where you were living, where you walk around in regularly?
Yes,
Okay. Did that happen here?
yes.
Okay. Did you consider that? Well, did you consider that in your analysis of this?
Oh, I don't think Mr. Alemany uses good judgment lots of times and for many years.
But just in terms of judgment, or crazier about this when someone does 3 within 18 hours within blocks of his own house?
I don't regard it as necessarily crazy.
Not
Bad judgment.
Not necessarily crazy. Did it occur to you that perhaps you should learn more about that and maybe talk to some of the recipient witnesses of some of these assaults?
No,
Do you know the names of any of the recipient witnesses to these assaults?
not from memory. I read the grand jury minutes where all these people talk, but there's got to be
Sir,
50
with
plus
regard,
one.
I asked you a question, you answered it, sir. Thank you. Sir, you said coincidentally, after he cut himself in the 3rd assault, and do you know how that, do you have any idea how that could have happened? Do you have any information on that?
I assume it was a struggle with the knife.
Okay, just talk a little bit louder for me, sir. Thank you. You say coincidentally he went to the same place that the victim of the 3rd assault went to.
Correct.
Okay. Now, the victim of the third assault's name was Ballantyne, Kaylee Ballantyne. And do you know how far the Tufts Medical Center was from where this assault occurred? Roughly?
Half a mile to a mile, I believe.
It was pretty close to where it occurred, correct?
Yes.
And you think it was just more bad judgment for the defendant, simply bad judgment for the defendant after viciously and horrifically stabbing Haley Ballantyne to go to the same closest hospital where presumably she would have been taken to as well? Is that just coincidence?
Well, he didn't have a car. It had to be within walking distance. He's bleeding. He was very upset about it. He didn't necessarily know that she went there, and he walked in and wanted attention. But he
So
insisted.
he walked to the hospital. He really had no other choices because he had to walk to the hospital, correct?
I believe so.
Okay. Well, if I suggested to you that he was in a cab and could go to any one of several hospitals in that cab, would that change your thoughts?
Well, not substantively.
Be fair to say there's probably nothing I can say to you that's going to change your thoughts substantively?
Well, I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you. So he didn't walk there, he took a cab. Are you still thinking that him going there is simply a product of coincidence rather than the product of somebody whose mind and cognitive abilities are seriously challenged and impaired?
I don't regard that as evidence of his being cognitively impaired.
Do you regard it as evidence that you should have taken into consideration as one of many, many things that brought you ultimately to the conclusions you've reached in this case? Yes or no?
That he took a cab,
That
or that he
he-
went to the same hospital?
The different things that I've been asking about for the last half hour, the different factors that I have asked you that you've admitted to me are bad judgment. The bad judgment is adding up to a lot of things, isn't it? A lot of bad judgments here, correct?
There's a lifetime of bad judgment.
Yes, there is a lifetime of it. There's a long history of bad judgments. Some people, with respect,
In the opinion of most people.
but in the opinion of many doctors that you have read about and that we have a list of, it's not just bad judgment, though. It's major mental disease. You've read that, too. You're discounting it, but you've read that, haven't you?
Yes.
Okay, now, with getting back to Tufts Medical Center, he coincidentally or otherwise gets to the Tufts Medical Center by cab, correct?
I'm assuming that, yes.
Okay, thank you. What happens after that with regard to his involvement at the Tufts Medical Center, if you know?
That either the victim or an associate of the victim.
You gotta talk a little louder,
Either
Dr. Kelly.
the victim or an associate of the victim, he got identified as the person who had stabbed her.
If I suggested to you that in your report you said it was the victim who did it, who made the identification, but in fact it was a friend of the victim, probably a roommate of the victim, who basically got things going. Okay?
Well, I assume that the victim was involved in identifying him as well at some point, but again, that level of detail in a psychiatric report about mental state and condition is not, in my opinion, particularly critical.
Sir, do you understand that I understand your thinking that in this case the devil's not in the details, and all of these facts that I suggest to you actually impact what's going on in his head, you don't find important. Correct? Okay.
Yes.
So he's in there. He's in the hospital. Do you know how it was that the friend of the victim realized he was there?
I read the grand jury minutes about that, but I don't recall specifically.
Verify. I understand you read the grand jury minutes. It didn't, apparently it didn't seem important to you, or perhaps it was stuck in your head, yes?
If it were important for my purposes, yes.
Well, if I suggested to you that the testimony here was that he was in there bleeding very badly and drew absolute attention to himself by screaming, "This fucking hospital," or something to that effect. "I'm bleeding out in this fucking hospital." Okay, is that significant, sir?
I have no doubt that that occurred. I mean,
But
the
in-
question of significance, not particularly.
Okay, so that doesn't say anything to you about any level of psychopathology or other mental processes going on in his head, correct? It says
That's
nothing to
typical.
you. In terms of his day, he attacked Alexandra Cruz in the morning. He killed Amy Lord an hour or two after that. He burned her car. In the evening, just to cap off the day, and I'm not trying to be funny, he walks down the street and attacks Kaylee Valentine, and probably would have killed her if she hadn't kicked him away and the door had locked behind him. Did you know that? Did you know that he probably would have killed her as well? This wasn't a robbery. This was a murder attempt. Did you know that?
I assumed it was.
And then he coincidentally gets to the same nearby facility that she's brought to and starts off by saying, "God damn, I'm bleeding out. Is F in place," or something to that effect. I may be getting some of the words wrong, but I'm not getting the point wrong. Okay. Drawing attention to himself after everything he's done that day, after everything he's just done in the last half hour to Kaylee Valentine. That doesn't suggest to you something is really wrong up here with this guy, to be colloquial?
That's typical of his personality disorder.
And then after that, if that wasn't enough, because enough people weren't watching yet, he said, "I can't get a effing drink of water here." Screamed it, according to the witness. There weren't enough people paying attention to him yet. And then, of course, do you understand that security then came over to him after that?
Sure.
And he drew the attention of Kaylee Valentine's friend, who happened to be there trying to assist her.
Well, I'm sure I read that in the grand jury minutes.
But
yes.
it didn't strike you, strike that. You understand, I'm not sure what you read and what you didn't read. You understand that, correct? You understand, I am not sure what's important to you and what isn't important to you for purposes of your diagnosis until I'm able to ask you. You understand that, yes?
Yes.
So when you say, "I'm sure I read that in the grand jury," my question to you is, then why don't you remember it?
Because there's 5,000 to 6,000 pages of stuff I've read. And my
Weren't
memory
you
is...
the person, the witness a while ago who said, when you were talking about all the diagnoses of major mental disease and psychosis that occurred between 99 and 2002, weren't you the person in this courtroom who said it's much more important to try to get some insights closer to the time of the offense conduct to really understand what was going on? Did I hear you say that?
You did.
Okay, so now we're talking about issues that happened on the morning of the 23rd twice, and then the evening of the 23rd going into 24th. Is that close to the offense conduct?
Yes.
Okay, but you don't remember that, but you do remember things that you want to discount from 1999 to 2002, correct?
No. I think that's not a fair characterization. I have said repeatedly, I don't know all the smaller details. I have a pretty good understanding of the rough outline. The quotes you had about the effing this and drawing attention to him, he's been doing that since he was in the 5th grade. That's the behavior of an antisocial
But he
personality
hasn't
disorder.
been doing it right after killing someone, has another instance where he did that right after an attempted murder, a murder, and an attempted murder?
I don't know of any other attempted murder that he did for which there is corroborating information.
But without beating this horse a bit too much, wouldn't you agree that this is a valuable insight into what's going on in his head on the 23rd of July of 2013? Something worth looking into?
This being what?
This being the statement he made to Alexandra Cruz in the morning, "Oh, I'm a hitman. You're the wrong woman. I was looking for X, Y, and Z. You're ABC. I'm sorry." So he goes from knocking her down and out, choking her, to picking her up and giving her stuff back, and she walks away. And with regard to Amy Lord and Kaylee Valentine, the other issues that I've asked you about today in terms of the congestion of the neighborhood, in terms of the location of this to where he is, in terms of what he has said at the hospital that night, that he even went to that hospital, what he said. Those are the things I'm talking about, sir.
And the question is?
The question is, you don't think it is psychologically, psychiatrically significant that after doing what he, directing your attention to Kaylee Valentine, that after what he just did to her, he's bleeding profusely from his hand, that he almost assures that he's going to come to everybody's attention a mile from where it happened? And in a hospital she's probably at or on her way there?
I doubt that he would have gone to that hospital if he knew that she was in the emergency room.
Sir, with regard to the different diagnoses in this case, you have reviewed the medical records carefully, yes?
Yes.
And be fair to say that in his early teen years, we're talking more about special needs kid. He's a special needs kid with certain extraordinary, different educational needs, right?
We're talking about a kid who has behavioral disturbance in school, yes.
But he also has learning disabilities. He also is functioning well below his grade level.
Yes.
Correct? And they come up with an IEP, an individualized educational program for him, correct?
Yes.
And he's there. And you're saying that that's the first instance of what you see in what is the word, the antisocial personality disorder,
Yeah.
correct?
Conduct disorder and oppositional disorder are the
I don't
teenage
think-
equivalents.
I don't think you ever called it an oppositional defiant disorder, but it'd be fair to say they're kind of real overlap in oppositional defiant and antisocial, yes, in its own way?
Well, you don't make the diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder till a person is 18. When you're dealing with youngsters, you call it conduct disorder. It's the age equivalent disorder of what is going to be an antisocial personality disorder when the person is in the adult world. So it's called oppositional defiant disorder. You don't use those terms for adults. You use the term antisocial personality disorder.
But you're saying today that what you observed about his behavior back then when he was in 5th grade or whatever grade it was, I guess 1996, I guess he'd been about 12 years old at that point. You know, you see in that the antecedents of antisocial disorder as an adult, correct?
Yes.
And what does comorbidity mean in a psychiatric context?
It means more than one diagnosis might apply.
And isn't it fair to say that what happens in the 5th grade and what you're seeing in the 5th grade, there's a huge comorbidity in the DSM comorbidity factor here, where this could be the antecedents of a variety of disorders and a variety of Axis 1 disorders as well, correct?
Could be.
And with regard to any of the so-called disorders, it would be fair to say that in the multi-axial model of the DSM, this would be an Axis 2 personality disorder.
In an adult, yes.
In an adult or in anyone who's diagnosed with it.
Yeah.
Because there's some disorders that you just don't have to wait to be an adult to be diagnosed, correct? And normally the Axis 1 disorders are generally your more serious disorders that generally tend to be the mental disease that you've been talking about. That's a precondition for the McCool standard of defect or disease that stops somebody from substantially appreciating the criminality, the wrongfulness of their act, or able to conform their behavior, correct? The
Correct.
dictates of the law.
Correct.
So your basic feeling is that any disorder, any behavioral disorder in the Axis 2 could never be a mental disease, as is understood in the McCool and the criminal responsibility analysis?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Sir, there are 2 behavior disorders, one of which he has been diagnosed everywhere from Bridgewater to Dr. Abloh to many of the earlier hospitals, called borderline personality disorder, correct?
That term has shown up in the records.
Well, it shows up quite regularly in the records, does it
Yeah,
not?
I wouldn't happen to agree with it, but it does show up in the records, yes.
And that particular disorder that shows up in the records regularly, and Dr. Abloh has opined to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as well that he is afflicted with, that can be very severe, can't it?
Yes.
And in the Bournewood records, in the Bridgewater records, in his discharge analysis right before the discharge, and they actually say he has severe borderline personality disorder, sir. Are you aware of that?
I think the discharge diagnosis is unambiguously antisocial personality disorder.
Well,
If you want to show me the record, I'm happy.
I will in a moment, but just assume for the sake of argument that I'm correct. That's what it says.
Yeah.
Okay, and please assume hypothetically that it says that in other records as well very regularly, and assume for the sake of argument that Dr. Abloh, who I think you heard yesterday, has also indicated that he believes that is one of the constellation, one of the universe of mental illnesses he's suffering from, and was suffering from in July 23rd, 24th of 2013.
It's not an illness.
Well, to you it's not an illness. To you it's not a mental illness, correct?
I think that even in the DSM, it's regarded as a disorder, not an illness.
But you don't consider it a mental disease.
Correct.
Okay. Because for you, mental disease is the precondition for satisfying the standard for insanity, correct?
Correct. That's what the standard
So
says.
if it's not a mental disease, then there has to be criminal responsibility, correct?
Or defect, yes.
Well, mental disease or defect.
Yes.
And both could arguably be applicable to him. You don't agree with that, but you can see arguments for that, can't you?
Not very good ones.
That doesn't surprise me, sir. With regard to borderline personality disorder and access to disorder, it is your belief that can never have psychotic features?
Can have psychotic features, but not a psychosis.
Well, let's assume someone was in the throes of a psychotic moment, whether it lasts 1 minute or it lasts 1 day. A dissociative, hypothetically speaking, a dissociative disorder that comes out of the borderline personality disorder. Would you consider that to be a mental disease for the criminal responsibility model?
No.
So if somebody has psychosis from that for a period of time, you would not consider that a mental disease?
I don't think you can have a psychosis for a brief period of time.
But don't people cycle? Isn't any, strike that. There are many Axis 1 mental diseases where you're not always in a psychotic state, correct?
Correct.
You periodically come into psychotic states.
Correct.
And at that point, you're suffering from a psychosis. There's a break in your ability to observe and perceive reality in the way objectively people would,
Yeah.
correct?
Correct.
So at that time, you have a psychosis, okay?
In an Axis 1.
In an Axis 1 disease.
Yes.
But there are other times, if you want to look at it as a peak and value in a kind of model, where you can look like just a regular person. You're not in a psychotic state.
Yes.
Okay. But at other times when you can cycle into that, correct? That can come from major depression. That can come from many affective disorders.
Yes.
Bipolar disorder, atypical bipolar disorder, major depression, correct?
Correct.
Any of those.
Yes.
And for the record, is it fair to say that all of those diagnoses are contained, not just one time, but a variety of times in the universe of the medical records that exist here, correct? You may disagree with them, but they exist, don't they?
Yes.
And they exist relative to him.
Yes.
So it's your testimony here today that an Axis 2 disorder, even if you cycle into psychosis, whether that lasts a day or a week, that's not really psychosis, so that can't, even though there's the same break in reality, that can't function as a mental disease.
I don't recognize what you're saying as something that
When you're
I
not
have
recognizing what I'm saying, you have to talk a little louder so I can hear you.
Okay. You don't, a psychosis is a sustained period of being out of touch, misinterpreting reality. You don't cycle in for a day or a week. So that's why I have problem answering your question.
But sir, you can cycle in for a day or a week. It may be unpredictable, but are you telling me that if you have a bipolar disorder, there are not times, particularly if you take medication, that you are absolutely seeing the world in an objectively validatable way as other people are?
I am not telling you that. I'm saying that a well-treated person with a bipolar disorder functions as well as most other people in the world.
And would that person be psychotic even when they're not, when they're functioning well because they're medicated?
They would not be psychotic when they're well-treated and medicated.
But so they're not psychotic. So if you're not taking medication and you have an Axis 1 disorder, as he's been diagnosed as having many times, if he was in fact under the throes of the mental illness, disease at that point, he would be psychotic, hypothetically speaking, correct? If he's not being medicated and treated.
Well,
I'm jumping ahead a little bit. I'm going to go back to borderline personality in a moment.
okay. I don't understand the question.
Okay. Now, let me just go back to borderline personality disorder for a moment, okay?
Okay.
It's located at section 301.83 in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. Do you have a copy of that with you?
No.
Okay. There are diagnostic criteria for every mental disease or disorder that is found in the DSM, correct?
Correct.
And do you generally believe, you heard perhaps you weren't here today, but there was testimony that Dr. Abloh had some criticism of the whole concept of the DSM. Do you generally believe that the DSM is the multi-axial model and the different criteria and categories, I should say, in here are generally pretty helpful and accurate?
They generally are accurate. I have some reservations about it as well.
Do you have any reservations about the borderline personality disorder category? That's kind of an unfair question. I apologize because you don't have it in front of you, but is that generally something that's troubled you?
I think generally the criteria in the book for most conditions, including borderline personality disorder, are generally pretty good. Perfect, no. A bit kind of cookbooky, got to have one of these and two of those kind of stuff. But generally, the descriptions are pretty good.
Okay. And assuming, again, for me to tie it up later when I'll show you medical records, that Bridgewater, in virtually every monthly diagnostic page report they had for the entire period of time he was there, among other diagnoses, gave him borderline personality disorder. And that also appeared in a variety of other hospitals when he was going to hospital back in 1999 to 2002 or 98 to 2002. May I read you some of the criteria for borderline personality?
Sure.
Okay. Be fair to say that normally there are 8 or 9 criteria, and a certain amount of them have to be deemed to be there for this diagnosis to be made, correct?
It would help me to have the book, if there's an extra one around, or a copy of that.
Yeah, if you want to stand next to Dr. Kelly, you can just do the examination.
I actually... If I waited long enough, Steve.
Do you want to direct me to a page, or shall I?
I'm directing you to page 663 of the DSM-5.
Yes.
Joanna, might I approach the sidebar for a moment? Sir, if you found page 663,
Yes.
I will try to get through this as quickly as I can. Would you agree, sir, that number 3, identity disturbance, markedly and persistently unstable self-image and sense of self, would you believe that is something that, based on the records you have reviewed, whether you agree with them or not, but the stuff contained in those records is something that would apply to this man?
I don't think so.
Okay. Impulsivity in at least 2 areas that are potentially self-damaging, would you consider that to apply
He's
to him?
impulsive, but it's more damaging to others. But he has scratched his wrists with his nails and things of that, so he's done some self-injurious behavior.
Well, it also says some substance abuse, spending, reckless driving, mutilating behavior. Actually, that's not in there. I'm sorry, that's in another thing. But you would agree that this arguably applies to him?
Not that it applies to him. It is often seen in borderline personality disorder. And usually it's serious slashing. So people with borderline personality disorder often have lots of scars on their wrists from razor blades and
Have you
stuff.
examined his wrist for scars, sir?
He showed me them, yes.
Okay. But that's 3. Recurrent suicidal behavior, gestures or threats, or self-mutilating behavior. Would you agree that applies to him,
Yeah,
sir?
he's had that, yes, in the past, for the most part. He also...
Well, we're talking about his condition in 2013, correct?
Yes.
In 2013...
I don't know of any self-injurious behavior at that point.
In July of 2013, we're talking about someone who's not medicated, someone
Correct.
who is not being treated, someone who is correct?
Correct.
Someone who's no longer in the DYS umbrella, isn't getting hospitalized, is basically out on his own, correct?
He's nearly 30. I mean, he's not in DYS, he's an adult.
Of course, but do we agree that after he turned 18, that the services that were being provided for him, which included multiple hospitalizations, ceased, correct?
He was not using those services.
My question
And he
is-
wasn't using the services available to him within DYS.
In your opinion, he was not being a good patient?
Correct.
Okay. But it's fair to say that DYS was referring him to hospital settings, correct? Hospital placements.
When he threatened
Yes,
suicide.
yes or no? Just yes or no, sir. Were they referring him there? Your
Yes.
lawyer can
Yes.
ask you more
Yes.
questions if
Yes.
necessary.
Yes, they
Okay.
were.
And when he got there, he got certain diagnoses by doctors other than yourself, correct?
Correct.
And those other diagnoses, whether you agree with them or not, I understand you're here testifying for the government, but whether you agree with them or not, at that point, doctors there saw he was suffering from what are psychotic mental diseases, correct?
Those diagnoses do occur in the chart, yes.
And I mean, regularly in the different hospitalizations, correct? Whether you agree with them or not, other doctors said that. Yes?
They're not the most common, but they do occur.
We're talking about Westwood, where he had Westwood Lodge, where he had several. I'll tell you exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about Westwood, Bournewood, and Arbor primarily.
I'm not asking practice questions.
Do I have to be under oath then? But, Doctor, are you curious as to what hospitals we're talking about as well?
No.
Okay. Thank you. But it's accurate to say that in these hospitals, he got these diagnoses. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And item number 6, borderline personality disorder, affective instability due to a marked reactivity of mood. And that relates to episodic dysphoria, intense episodic dysphoria, irritability, anxiety, usually lasting a few hours and only rarely more than a few days. Okay? Would we agree that that applies to him as well?
No.
Okay. Inappropriate, intense anger or difficulty controlling anger, frequent displays of temper, constant anger, recurrent physical fights. Would we agree that that applies to him?
Yes.
Transient stress-related paranoid ideation, severe dissociative symptoms. You heard Dr. Abloh's testimony. You know that he believes that applies very strongly. What is your position on that?
He's the only person who believes he has.
The only person who's been testifying here, besides
It's
yourself?
that never occurs. Dissociative identity disorder never occurs in the record. Dr. Abloh is the only person who...
Sir, did you hear me, sir, say something about dissociative identity disorder?
Yes.
You did? I said severe dissociative symptoms, sir. Symptoms.
That means dissociative disorder, okay? Dissociative symptoms.
Does it? Is that what you're testifying to right now?
Yes.
Okay. So there's no dissociative symptoms that come from any other sources than dissociative identity disorder, correct?
No, dissociative symptoms can occur in borderline personality disorder.
Exactly. And I'm reading that to you, and I'm suggesting that Dr. Abloh has testified that he has, among other things, borderline personality disorder, and it's reflected itself in these dissociative symptoms. Do you understand? I am
Yes.
telling you that?
Yes.
Okay. You don't agree with that, correct?
No, I guess the question is, are you asking whether he's
Right.
dissociative
It would
symptoms?
be fair to say you don't agree with that diagnosis.
Correct. I do not agree
You
with...
do not agree, but you agree that he made it, and you heard him say that, correct?
Yes.
And are you also aware that dissociative symptoms can come from, apart from borderline disorder personality, can come from other mental diseases than dissociative identity disorder as well? Doesn't have to just be dissociative identity disorder. Do you understand that?
It can be generally not in diseases, but can be in axis 2 personality disorders.
Or in axis 1, sir, not in axis 1, diseases such as more transient stress reactions, dissociative stress reactions, that's also an axis 1 disorder, or dissociative disorder, NOS, or unspecified, that talks about far more transient losses of memory, far more unpredictable and transient losses of memory, that's also an axis 1 disorder?
I'm afraid I don't understand the question. There are some disorders that are stress-related that can end up on axis 1 that are called diseases sometimes, but are more often called disorders. The example would be post-traumatic stress disorder, okay? And in that kind of condition, which is understandable, person exposed to terrible, can tune out, okay, and have dissociative symptoms. But it's not, it's a disorder, not a disease, but it can end up on axis 1.
But wouldn't it be fair to say, sir, that for purposes of the criminal responsibility model, if something is psychotic in nature and is on axis 1, that is a mental disease for purposes of criminal responsibility? Would you agree with that?
No. I mean, I don't understand what you're, if you'd be more specific, maybe I could respond.
If someone were suffering from a dissociative disease that was more transient in nature, like dissociative NOS or unspecified dissociative, which is very different than I respectfully suggest to you and ask you, then the DID, the dissociative identity disorder, which is, as you say, the old multiple personality disorder, they're dissociative disorders and diseases that produce psychotic features, psychosis, for different periods of time. It cycles in differently than the more fixed DID, Would you agree with that?
I don't, no, I don't.
But you understand that's what Dr. Abloh opined today?
I don't know what he opined today.
You weren't here.
I wasn't here.
All right. I withdraw that question. Okay, and with regard to borderline personality disorder, which is an Axis 2 disorder, do you agree that when and you agree that he has been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder by a lot of the hospitals that he has been in, correct?
Some of them, yes.
Okay, including Bridgewater.
Their discharge diagnosis was antisocial personality disorder. When all was said and done, and they were discharging him, it was antisocial personality disorder.
And if I said to you in the month before that, when they talked about his transfer back to the jail situation, to a jail setting, that the diagnosis that the doctor set out then included borderline personality, polysubstance abuse disorder, which is an Axis 1 disorder as well. Would that change your thinking at all?
No, it won't.
I mean, is there something magical about the discharge summary that's signed by usually a licensed social worker when they send it back?
It is the consensus of all the clinical staff. This is our diagnosis. Having had him there for 13 months, this is our diagnosis.
But if, respectfully, sir, if for 10 of those months it's a different diagnosis, and let's assume for the sake of argument all the medication and therapy he's getting has actually made a difference, and when they send it back at the end of 2014 or whatever that was,
August.
let's even assume August. Let's even assume you're correct that at that point he's over it. Isn't it more instructive that they thought he had it much closer to July of 2013?
No,
It's not.
no.
So if I show you tomorrow when we're back, every one of those pages where it sets out that his, the multi-axial diagnosis, that they say that personality, borderline personality, every one of them, month after month after month, which was closer to July of 2013. And for whatever the reason, in that last month, perhaps he'd gotten well from the medication. You're still saying that they said it, and 1 out of 12 times, 1 out of 10 times, whatever it is, that's the one that counts, and all the other doctors that signed off on that for the entire almost year he was there, that doesn't count?
It counts, but it doesn't count nearly as much as we're discharging him.